Hello, welcome to the Vineyard Church podcast. For more information, visit us at vkcwest.com.
I'm Steve Jones. I'm a worship pastor here at Vineyard. We're going to be continuing on in our series on living a life equipped for all the things that God has for us. And over these last weeks, we've had several different things that we've looked at. Today, we're going to be looking specifically at having a reason for the hope that's in us. And we're going to do that looking a little bit at the sort of intellectual and reason foundations for a life of faith. And then we're also going to look at the power of the story of the ways that God has moved in our lives and changed us, and the gift that becomes to other people as they're questioning or asking or seeking a life with God themselves. And as we begin this sort of time today, don't worry, things aren't going to be too terribly intellectual. I have to Google things to understand the jokes in the Big Bang Theory. So it's, we'll keep things, an everybody kind of a level. But as we begin today, we're going to start by talking about like some foundational understanding of what it means for us to have a life with God. And these things of like what a life with God consists of and how it shapes who we are and how we interact with the world are really helpful, because as we'll see as we move through the morning, so many of the questions that we have or the questions that people around us have in a life with God are not only intellectual, they are also deeply relational. And so let's lay a little foundation of what we believe a life with Jesus means as we go about this journey of interacting with people around us. Here's some basic assumptions of what would happen in a life with God. The first is this: if you are a follower of Jesus, then you have had a moment or a series of moments where God's love has encountered your life. And you've experienced a change in who you are. Just on a really basic level. Like you've encountered Jesus and that has, his love has changed you in a way. If you're a follower of Jesus, then one of the things you've experienced in moments like this is that you have experienced the forgiveness of God. Like, you are no longer defined by the most broken things that you've done or the most broken things that have been done to you. The forgiveness of God, like his presence and his love encounters you, but also the power of a life of forgiveness changes really the way that you encounter God and people. There's this other foundational belief of a life with God, which is this: when you enter into a life with Jesus, you're a new creation. Like the old things that were true of you are no longer the things that are truest of you now. Paul uses this new creation imagery, like the old things are gone and the new things of life have come. Who you are now is different than who you were before. There's this other foundational belief of a life with God, and it's this. This one is actually challenging for so many of us, because it happens at a moment where we give our life to God, and then we have to practice it over and over and over again, day in and day out, with a life with God. And here's this foundational truth of who we are. We used to be the God of our own life, and now God is the God of our life. Is this making sense? I used to be in charge of me, and I used to decide how I was going to do everything. And now there is one who is higher than me. And how he says that the world is, and who he says I am, it actually matters more It has a greater weight and significance because I'm not the God of my own universe anymore. The God who made the universe and me within it is now the God of my life. And not only is God bigger than me, but there's this other foundational truth of a life with God, which is this: His Spirit comes and rests in people that enter into a relationship with Him in a way that transforms and renews our mind, and we see the world differently than we used to see the world. All the sort of clever wisdom of the world and you know, all of the greatest wisdom of Facebook Reels, right, is no longer the truest way that we see the world. There's something far deeper and more significant about a life with God, where He takes up residence in us and changes the way that we think and the way that we see things. There's this other thing that happens when our mind starts to get renewed and transformed. And it's this, that actually we start to live in a different kind of a way. Has anyone experienced this in their life with God? That slowly but surely we live in a different kind of a way. And it's actually countercultural. Because all of the ways that people around us who haven't given their lives to God live are just a bit different from the way that we now find ourselves living. And listen, we are, if any of us have any shred of humility in the life of faith, we are not perfect. We're not getting it right on any given Tuesday. And yet, the Lord working on us, like the ways that we live start to come into tune and into harmony with the way that God created things. There's a different way that people who have a life with God live. And the ways that we're actually different than how we used to be, here's the beautiful thing that happens. They're actually good news to the people that we work around, to the people that we live around, to the people that we're on like the PTA board or the homes association board with, or the people that we share hobbies or we're on a sports team with, or we're in a fraternity or a sorority with. Like, this life with God changes actually who we are in a way that becomes really good news to the people that we're around, because here's the thing that they start to experience. When they do things that are wrong or broken to us, instead of us interacting with them in a way that's like, oh, you did something wrong to me, well, then I will do something wrong to you. When people wrong us, actually what they encounter is somebody that extends grace and forgiveness. And that if somebody acts as an enemy to us, we actually return love instead. And that is such a rare thing in human relationships, that a person who has begun following God and a life with God and all these things that we've talked about actually changes their view of what relationships might look like or might be. And then the people who have needs around us, what do they encounter? They encounter, if God is getting a hold of not only our relational dynamics, but also our stuff, they encounter extravagant generosity for no good reason. Does this make sense? Like, a life with God becomes good news to people that are around us that have practical needs in the world. And people who are hurting and grieving. I was having a conversation with a friend even this morning about one of his friends that passed away. And it's like, when a Jesus-following person is next to someone who has experienced loss or is grieving, it's actually good news, because blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted is not just a thing that Jesus said, it's a thing that Jesus does. And He does it through the lives of people who love Him and follow Him. And the people that experience, like, think about the difference that I've described of living a life with God and what people might encounter. The people who experience those kinds of people working next to them or living next to them or around them in day-to-day life experience something that's different And the way in which it's different is like profoundly good news for them and their life. Are we tracking? Okay. So we're just laying that basic foundation in place because we're going to make some other assumptions as we read through the words of one of Jesus' disciples, a man named Peter. Peter makes this assumption that people who are around the Jesus following people would be profoundly encountered by that. And so describing the ways that God actually changes a person that would make a difference in the life of someone else can be really helpful in laying that foundation. So Peter was a person who followed Jesus. He was one of Jesus' disciples. He was also, after Jesus' death and burial and resurrection, Peter became a leader of the church in Jerusalem. And then years after leading the church in Jerusalem to know and to follow Jesus, the risen Jesus, Peter becomes someone who actually shares this message of Jesus outside of just the Jewish world. He shares it all throughout the Roman Empire. And specifically, we're going to look at a letter that Peter wrote to some churches in what would be considered Asia Minor, or like modern day Turkey. And people in this church who've begun to follow Jesus, what they're encountering, they are attempting to be good news in the place that they're living. But what they're encountering are negative responses to their Jesus followingness. They're either in indifference to these people whose lives have been changed, or they're skeptical of these people whose lives are changed, or some of them are just actually out and out bothered by the difference in these people and wish they would go away or begin to persecute them. And in Peter's letter to these Jesus following people in this place, what he does is three things. This is sort of an overview of Peter's letter to these people, which circulated throughout Rome. He first starts off by reminding them of their new identity as God's family. Like, you used to be like this, and now you are like this. You used to have this identity, and now being a part of God's family is the new identity for you. Then the next place that he takes his letter to them is that he says that they're actually to see the suffering and the tension of living around people who are not following Jesus. It's actually a natural part of the work of God moving in the world around them, and that their role within that is to share the hope that they've found in Jesus in those places. And then finally, he sort of lands his letter to these churches by reminding them of the future hope they have because of this life with God. So what we're going to do in sort of opening up is read a pretty decent section of 1 Peter chapter 3. And if you want to open your Bibles, feel free to do that, but we'll have it on the screen as well. Starting in verse 8, here's some of Peter's instructions to this early church. He says, "Finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you would inherit a blessing." Okay, I'm going to say something that will have a little bit of weight in our modern day life. When you encounter followers of Jesus on social media, how many of them seem to be sympathetic and deeply loving and compassionate and humble? We're going to get to some other assumptions that Peter makes. His belief is that somebody whose life has encountered Jesus, like the stuff that would overflow out of their world and out of them would look something like that. And then he goes on and he says this: "For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. Right? He's like, hey guys, this is the way forward for us in a world that's skeptical or antagonistic toward a life of faith. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those that do evil. Who is going to harm you if you're eager to do good? But even if you should suffer for what's right, you're blessed. Don't fear their threats and don't be frightened. And then this passage we'll return to like several times throughout the morning. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. And always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. Let me read that again. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give a reason for the hope that you have. And do it with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. For it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. My friends, there is plenty of suffering for all of us in the world. We might as well experience the suffering that comes from us not doing evil, but doing good, right? Like if we're going to encounter some pain and some tension, let it be the pain and the tension that emerges from living a life devoted to Jesus. There's this assumption that Peter makes. Hopefully you noticed it. It sort of grabs at us with a question. And it goes something like this. Like, when is the last time as a follower of Jesus that you were just going about living your life and someone runs up to you and grabs you by the shoulders and goes, what is the reason for the hope that lies within you? Huh? Is this happening on any given Monday morning when you enter the office at work? His assumption is like there would be something so other and so different that people would be asking, what is going on here? Now, here's the truth, I believe, is that while it's unlikely that people are grabbing us by the shoulders and demanding an answer for the hope that lies within us, there are moments, I've experienced this in my life working as a pastor, and I've experienced this in my life as an artist and a musician in those sorts of settings, and I've experienced this in my life as a coach for business leaders. People may not ask it in that straightforward a way, but very, very often what people will do is open up the door and begin to talk about the things in their world and in their life that just don't seem to be working. And they're sharing them with you as though perhaps you're the kind of person who would care. Does that happen? Have you experienced this? Like, why is it that of all the people in the office that somebody could come and park, and I had a person at my workplace, I'll try and keep it really vague, who came into my office this last week and sat down and started to process through how their marriage was going and how they're raising their daughter was going. And I'm like sitting there going, I'm not sure why you're in my office, but I'm happy to be here to listen and to see what the Lord might want to speak to this person. And we have this lengthy conversation about raising a 13-year-old girl who has questions about who she is in the world, right? And the truth is, if we live a life with God and His Spirit's in us, one of the things that He wants to do with us, if we make ourselves available, is cross our paths with people who might not be able to articulate it exactly, but they're wondering if there is life bigger and deeper and better beyond the life that they're experiencing, not living with God. When I was very, very young, about 6 years old, I started a life with God. I was a stubborn, strong-willed child. Any of you have these? It seems that Brooke and I only make these. I was a stubborn, yeah, there we go. We've got some finger pointing. We're keeping it low, but good work, parents. My parents raised me in the church, and they took me to Awana. And Awana is a place where children play games and have friends and hide God's words in their heart in a way that makes a significant impact later in life, turns out. And when I was 6 years old, I was at Awana, and one of my little friends, a kid named Jeremy Katzenberger, did something that I can't remember to this day, but it was something that bothered me enough for me to sock him in his face. And then he fought back. And both of our fathers are Awana leaders. And there was a rule in the Jones household, which was like, just don't embarrass me. And so I violated one of the primary rules of being a Jones, which was embarrass my father. So we get sort of pulled off of each other, and we're like, separated, and then it's like, I get the look, and the look is like, you're toast, bud. And so the whole, when the air is kind of thick on the ride home, and you're little, but it's not about to be good. It's that sort of drive home. And then my dad says to me, go to your room. I don't want to go to my room. I know what happens at the room. And so I go and I sit on the bed, and he comes in and he sits down next to me, and instead of being real frustrated, he has this kindness to him that I still remember to this day. At 40 years old, I remember it wasn't anger, it was kindness. And he sits down next to me, and turns out early in my dad's childhood, he'd gotten in a fight with a kid. And instead of punishing him, his mom shared the love and the grace of Jesus. And it was a pivotal moment in his childhood. And he sits down next to me and begins to share with me about grace and forgiveness. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is a lot better than corporal punishment. Right? And I have this moment where something of the presence of Jesus softened my little stubborn heart. And I decided I wanted a life with God. I wanted grace to be the story of my life too. And so I gave my life to Jesus, and as my parents would tell it, because I don't really recall, I became much easier to parent. Something softened in my heart, and something changed in me. Now, what this means that my life with God began at age 6 is this. Most of the sinning that I've got up to has been after giving my life to Jesus. And at age 6, the questions, on a performance level, navigating through a life of faithfulness and obedience with God has happened over the other 35 years, not the first 6 years, right? And then let me tell you something else that this means for my life with God, is that most of the deep sort of troubling questions that come with a life, anyone have doubts in their life of faith? Those doubts that I have in my life of faith emerged after having given my life to Jesus, as I was growing and through my teenage years and through my early 20s when I'm in school settings and thinking deeply about the world, and when I'm trying to navigate life and parenthood and marriage and either the deep philosophical questions or the deep intellectual questions, or just the deep questions of the human heart of how to interact with the Lord, these things all emerged after having given my life to Jesus. And sometimes I think the thing that is presented to us as followers of Jesus is this. You used to be like this, then you had a moment of conversion, and then you never doubted or sinned again. And if you did, make sure you don't talk about it because it's embarrassing to us at church. Right? I think if we get like real gut level honest, this life of faith with God, the questions that we have about God emerge throughout seasons of life, be they relational or intellectual. Is this making sense? And people who pretend that that's not the case, and then they try and walk around their workplaces, sort of like on a high horse, telling other people how they can get their wagons fixed, many times do more distancing people from a life of faith than inviting people into a life of faith. And people who are really honest and full of integrity about the challenges of living in this season of life, relationally with God, relationally with people who are comfortable saying, I still have questions myself, but I know the one who helps me navigate through those questions. People who are really honest and authentic about this life with God being a journey, and how we got a whole lot of weakness and frailty and questioning, and the Lord actually is near and with us as we walk those things through. That people who are honest in that way, all of a sudden you find that people who are around them feel completely comfortable saying, yeah, well, okay, so here's the thing. I have some questions about God as well. So there's some fascinating tension of Jesus actually changes us and we begin to look different than people around us. But also, we're called to hold with humility our own frailty and challenges and question asking in this thing, because it actually becomes the level ground where other people can come and bring their questions and frailty. Are we together on this? Have we met people who maybe didn't want to admit that they had any doubts, and you're like, I don't know, right? There's a Christianity Today article that came out a few years back, and it actually talked about people who are looking at a life of faith and some of the core objections and challenges that people have as they're thinking about a life of faith. And I want to share some of these with you. And you I don't know. You got 10 fingers, there's 10 things. You count them up, how many of these you've actually wrestled with over your life of faith. And then we'll take a little survey, all right? Here's the top 10 objections to faith that the research surfaced. Christians are hypocrites. Number one. Anybody know someone who claimed to have a life with God and then their life didn't look like something that a life with God might produce? And then you go, I don't know, is anyone really real about this thing? Here's the second objection that people have. What about all the atrocities committed by Christians throughout history? Not just the Christians I know here in my neighborhood that don't seem to be real about this thing. What about all the broken stuff that happened throughout history and church history and these kinds of things? You ever had that question or had someone bring that question or a version of it to you? Here's the next one. I don't know. Faith is just a crutch for bad thinkers. You ever thought this or come across this? How about this one? It's narrow-minded to think that Jesus is the only way to God. How about this one? Being a good person is all that really matters. So you do it your way, and I'll do it my way, because really just being a good person is all that really matters. What about this one? Well, what about the people who've never heard about Jesus yet? They never had a chance. Or this one. I don't know if I can trust the Bible. I mean, is that thing really true? It was written a long time ago. I actually had a friend at work, and I would share with him some of the teachings of Jesus over the course of time, and he didn't have a life of faith. And eventually he reached a point and he goes, "Why do you keep talking about the Bible? Who cares what's in that thing?" And I was like, "I appreciate your candor." How about this one? If God is good, then why is there evil? And then how about this one? Why is there suffering? Or this one, if there is a hell, why would a loving God ever send anyone to it? All right, you got some fingers on your hands. How many of you had 10 out of 10 on this list that either you've wrestled with or people around you have asked you about? Yes? Like, I've personally wrestled with every one of those in the last 35 years of following Jesus, and needed to dig deep and understand these sorts of things. And it actually gets made sort of more complicated when you enter into like academic or educational environments where most of the people are smarter than the guy who was like your volunteer youth group leader when you were a kid, right? These guys have doctorates. They're smart. And they think this is nonsense, this life of faith that I have. And there's this challenge and this tension because you share the same questions that many other people who aren't following God have. And it sets you on a journey, because if I'm completely candid with you, like some of the answers that are given by well-meaning people are really just a way of trying to say, can you just go away? You're making me uncomfortable with your questions. And I've found that, yes, there's 10 questions there that are really common. But what I've actually found is this. As I've started to dig deep into reasoning and faith, it's like a Russian nesting doll. Do you know what that is? Like one of those little dolls where like you pull off the top and then there's another doll inside. And then you pull off the top of that one and there's another doll inside. And you're like, oh, there may be 10 questions on this list, but each one of them has a subset of 14 questions. And then each of those 14 subset of questions have like item A, item A1, and you start to go, like there's a lot of question asking involved in this. And we couldn't possibly in one morning tackle every one of these core questions. But one of the gifts here's one of the things that I believe is true of a life of faith. A life of faith does not mean that we take our questions and bury them and pretend they don't exist. And a life of faith does not mean that now that I have faith, all these questions clear themselves up. And so one of the best gifts that I've had, whether it's my father or some spiritual leaders or some mentors along the way, is that people have been comfortable with me bringing questions, and then they've walked alongside of me to help me to make sense of things. And I'm going to give you a few resources. You can write them down, or you can come back to them online. If some of these questions sort of, you go, yeah, I actually have a lot of those. Here's some resources if you want to do some journeying and some question asking and wrestle with these sort of, like impulses of, I need deeper answers for these things in life. The first is this: we as a church have an alpha class. This round is getting ready to wrap up, but this alpha class is like eating together in community with people, and the whole point of it is bring the questions. And we're going to lay this foundation of a reasonable life with faith. We're going to answer some of the core questions that people have. And for some of us, like we go, I don't know, I'm not an apologetics guy. I can't answer every question that my coworker has. Well, like the beauty of living in a faith community is you can just say like, I don't have really a great answer for your question, but if you come with me and share a meal, we can bring that question together and we can both find out, right? There's another few resources that are like pieces of classical literature in Christian streams that have been incredibly helpful. There's a guy named Lee Strobel who was a skeptic and was trying to disprove faith, and then on his journey to disprove faith, realized that actually faith is far more reasonable than the alternatives. And he wrote 2 books, Case for Christ and Case for Faith, that really wrestle beautifully with some of these core issues of if faith is reasonable. There's an author named C.S. Lewis. Some of you might have read some things that Lewis wrote. He wrote a book called Mere Christianity that talks about a foundational worldview, a reasonable foundational worldview of following God. And he wrote another book called The Problem of Pain, where he talks about why is there suffering and brokenness in the world. There's, on a deeper, more personal sort of searching level for people who are hurting, there's a book called Where's God When It Hurts? By Philip Yancey that is incredibly useful and helpful. And then there's a book for people who look at the scriptures and they go, man, that's a mess. That Old Testament stuff, I don't even know how to navigate all the warring and all the tension and all the oppression and all the brokenness that the people are getting up to. And then what's God's role within all that stuff? There's a book called Is God a Moral Monster? By Paul Copan that talks about how do we navigate human brokenness and God's redemptive design and plan as he interacts with people? There's a website called Reasonable Faith that a philosopher and brilliant thinker named William Lane Craig has posted about 1,000 articles on that you can search for topically that give really beautiful answers for some of these things. And then there's a book by a former Presbyterian pastor named Tim Keller called Making Sense of God. If some of these questions stir in your heart, here's the truth of the matter. You can let them sit there and pretend that they don't exist, or you can engage your heart and your mind and your soul and your strength and press into this thing. Very specifically, there's 3 conversations of this list and this journey that I thought would be really useful for us to get into. These are the 3 questions that people have in their life of faith that I've found time and time again. These have come up in my workplace with people that are considering a life with God, more than 10 times. Each of these has come up in conversations with coworkers just within the last year or so. The first is this. This is a challenge that people have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first lid off the Russian nesting doll and give okay, just start walking this direction down this path and it'll be helpful directionally for you. The first problem that people interact with me around a lot is the problem of evil and suffering. Right? If God is good and God is all powerful, then why is there suffering and evil in the world? Why would God not just do away with even the option for there to be suffering in the world? And in that, what you see in the design of Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, is this. That God creates, and he creates things good. And then he gives people a choice. Could God have created a world in which you had no choice and I had no choice, so we didn't mess up his good and perfect creation? Absolutely. But the extent to which you restrain freedom and choice, and the extent to which you control, is the extent to which you restrain the possibility of a response, a free response of love and relationship. Is this making sense? He could have programmed us like our iPhone. I could program my iPhone to wake me up and say, Steve, you're amazing. But it's far more beautiful when my daughter says, Daddy, I love you, because it came out of relationship and came out of her. So he creates with freedom in the system for people, which is a necessary condition for a relationship. And then here's how the story goes. When people object to suffering or pain or evil in the story, he gives free will in the system. And then here's the deal. Like, we've got some ownership on this deal. Because we use that freedom to do broken things. Have you noticed this? Like, did God make me do broken things? Like, I used my free will. I did broken things to other people, and they did broken things to me. This is the story of Eden. This is the story of the garden. People go, I don't want you to be God. I want me to be God. I'm going to do it my way. Uh-oh, we're bad at holding the world together, turns out. Does it make sense? Like, when people are objecting to, well, why did God? And it's like, I don't know. Why did we? Like, have you ever? Because I have. It's a much more honest and humble thing. And then here's the beautiful miracle that if we own that place, that you get to go on this journey of like, isn't it amazing that a God who made everything good and then gave us free will and we chose to go astray? Isn't it amazing that a God like that would lay his own very life down to pay the price for that in order to reconcile us back into relationship with him? Like, what kind of a good God would do a thing like that based on all the stuff we've been getting up to? It takes you on a very different journey. The second core question that comes up over and over again is this one. Is Jesus really the only way? That seems very narrow. I find that troubling. Here's the thing. If Jesus was not a liar, and if Jesus was not a crazy person, then yes, he's the only way. Because he specifically says, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Well, that seems very narrow. No, actually, like, for God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. Like, it's an everybody offer. It is the most inclusive offer to every single human being from any time, any place, anywhere that's on the table. And Jesus does all the heavy lifting on this deal. Right? And then people say, well, I don't know. Well, here's the beauty. You can't even earn it. You don't even deserve it. It's not because of what you've done, and it's not because of what you've not done. Like, God has done all the work on this deal. I don't know, it just seems so narrow. Well, here's the thing. Like, the God of the universe has thrown a lifeline to drowning people. In all time and all of eternity, everyone has been extended a lifeline. And the drowning person who goes, maybe not that lifeline. Maybe that's an us thing and not a God thing. Everyone is wanted. Everyone is invited in. Is it narrow? No. But there is a way that God has created for us to experience salvation and life with him. And then here's the last one, and we're going to read a few passages, one from Paul, and one is a continuation of Peter's words. What about the hypocrisy? That seems to be the last hang up that I come across over and over and over again. And so we're going to close by looking into this one for a moment. Brennan Manning is an author who wrote a book called Ragamuffin Gospel. And in this book, Manning says these words. The greatest single cause of atheism in this world is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and then walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. Right? Interestingly, most of the time, when someone is bringing questions about a life of faith, it's because they've found someone that they can bring a question to that has some authenticity to them. in their life of faith. And there are three, if this is useful to you. Here's the thing. You'll only ever know what questions someone is truly asking about a life with God if you become a good listener and just stop talking so quick in the conversation. Has anyone ever had a deep conversation with somebody that loved interrupting them over and over again? Or cutting them off? Or explaining away their concerns? Like, no, actually, relationships work way better when we're listening well. And so when people bring you questions of faith, one of the first things that we need to know is usually the first thing that they bring to us may not be all that there is in the room when they bring the question. And there are usually three things that are going on if somebody has questions around a life of faith. The first is this, that they are sincerely interested and they're sincerely seeking. Anybody come across somebody who's like, I've got questions, I want them answered because I'm real, I want to get to truth? Anybody been that person? We're like, I'm not just asking questions to ruin your day. I've like got real questions, I'm really seeking here. I had a friend who I was on a road trip with for work, and he was sitting next to me, and he says to me, Steve, here's the thing. I have studied the universe very, very big and very, very small. Like I've studied the universe and the galaxies and the cosmos, and I've gone big, and I've also studied the intricacies of how all this stuff is put together. And here's the thing, like, I cannot believe that this just happened or that matter just did this to itself. Like there's too much design for there not to be a designer. And I'm like, don't look now, bud. You're talking yourself into faith. And then we had a good laugh, and he goes, but here's my problem. Like, a God who's that big and that did all that, does he really care about me in this place at this time on the planet? A single individual person. The God that is that big and that intelligent in design. That person is sitting around thinking about this guy in the Midwest. Doesn't he have other things to do? Well, that is an honest and sincere kind of a searching question, right? Wouldn't you say? And the real question is like, yes, God is transcendent and big, but is he also near and good? That's what he's asking. And we spent 4 hours of a leg of a trip talking that one through. Wow, well, if we can see anything through the life of Jesus, then yeah. God is very big, and God is very near, and God is very good. This is what Jesus means for people. And then he kind of said, well, all right. I have the second set of questions. This is the second place the questions come from. Someone is hurting. Life isn't working out quite well. Right? And he goes, well, but then where was God when? And he starts to describe the loss of a family member and a few other tragic things that occurred in his story. And we sit together, and would it have been helpful to him for me to be like, well, so there's this whole like thing where it's like God is all powerful, and I start making an argument. Is that useful to my friend? That's not what we're doing here. He wants to know, does God love me? Does he care? Is he close? And so truth be told, the best course of action wasn't argue, it was, well, I don't know, let's pray and ask him if he cared. And invite him. The last place that questions come from is sometimes somebody who looks like they're searching, but really they're just trying to justify, not actually searching, but they're doing it with questions. And that's somebody who, like I observed this, a guy was arguing about, are there absolute truths? Is there real moral law? It seems like everything's pretty much just relative. And I don't know about all this kind of thing. And then another person in the conversation says to him, well, like, what if God appeared to you like face to face and said, I am real. There are absolute truths of moral law. There's my character and nature and my goodness and my justice in this world. And he goes, well, what would you say then? And he goes, well, I'd have to hear what he said and see if I agreed with it. And I go, well, that's just about the most honest thing I've ever heard. Because if you're face to face with the Almighty and you go, you need to agree with me, and then I'll believe, then you're just admitting that you think you're the Almighty. And I'm like, okay, well, listen, you're not on any kind of search, and yet you're being honest about not being on any kind of search. You're framing it in questions, which is a little not quite real, but like, here's the deal. For a person that you encounter, and they sort of act like they're searching, but they're not very curious, do not waste words arguing. Spend life loving well. Because the first thing that has to happen in those moments is not an obnoxious Christian with great arguments beating them. It's a loving person being present in their life when they do finally come to the end of themselves. And so Peter and Paul say these words. We're going to close with reading these. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. He's talking about how he chose to show up and interact with people that didn't have a life with God. And this is so beautifully instructive for us. He says this, and so it was with me, brothers and sisters, when I came to you. I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony of God. He didn't try and prove that he was a smarty pants, right? For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except for Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness with great fear and trembling. Like, he didn't go big and impressive. He went humble and loving. You noticing this? My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. Arguments typically unravel when God shows up. We do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age or rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. No, we declare God's wisdom, a mystery that's been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. Like, just because the world missed it doesn't mean it wasn't deeper and truer than what they think is true. However, as it's written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those that love him, these are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. You know who's better at leading people to Jesus than us? The Holy Spirit. Sometimes my best interactions with people who are searching for a life of faith are to go, God help, and let him get in the mix. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except their own spirit within them? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. What we have received is not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so we may understand what God has freely given us. This is what we speak, not in words taught to us by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual realities with Spirit-taught words. like the Spirit of God communicating to the spirit of a person. The person without the Spirit doesn't accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and can't understand them because they're discerned only through the Spirit. But the person with the Spirit makes judgments about all things, but such a person is not subject to mere human judgments. For who has known the mind of the Lord, so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. Isn't it good? Here's something deeply true for us. As we think of being equipped for a life of interacting with people who are looking for the hope that lies within Jesus, is this: God is far more interested in them finding him than we will ever be. And it's what he's up to in their world. And so let's look at our piece of this thing. If it's not to be the smartest, and it's not to be the most persuasive, and if the Spirit of God is the one that actually does the work of the real deep work in the process, well then what is our role in this, our primary role in this thing? If the Apostle Paul says, I didn't bother with being smart, well then none of us really have much of a chance of being that smart. He was a brilliant dude. Peter says this, chapter 4, verse 7 of his letter. The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and sober of mind so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Somebody's come across hypocritical Christianity. You know what covers it up? Finding a real and loving person who follows Jesus. Offer hospitality with one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gifts you receive to serve others. You know what wins people over? A life not about me, but a life where you matter. As faithful stewards of God's grace in various forms, if anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength that God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. So many things in a life of searching come into focus when people realize that God is near and he is good. So many other things fall beautifully in place. Because it is true that the greatest single cause of atheism in the world are Christians that acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle, and that an unbelieving world finds it unbelievable when they encounter that sort of thing. But also, according to Paul and Peter, it's equally true that people of God living as new creation, setting love on display, will inevitably be asked, what is the reason for the hope that lies within you? And that is where the unbelieving world will find the one who is worthy to be believed in.
Thanks for listening this week. If you are looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, go to bkcwest.com.